Good afternoon, everyone, and once again, welcome to this webinar on understanding economic risk factors in the construction work. My name is Neil Ensland. I'm the Occupational Health and Safety Head at the Master Builders KwaZulu Natal. Just as you see there's some housekeeping. For those of you, feel free to use the chat box to greet and make comments and ask questions. The sessions will be recorded and made available to you once at the completion of the webinar. And also, please do us all a favor by completing our evaluation form. By doing this, you will assist us in ensuring we improve these webinars as we're going forward. So we are here today for one reason. October is Global Economic Month, and during October, the human factors economic community takes time to commemorate economics by raising awareness on economic, particular to stakeholders who are affected by economic issues or could benefit from implementing economics. Globally, various awareness initiatives are run to help various users understand what economics is, how economic risk may affect them, and the benefits of implementing economics on performance, health, and safety. In line with this, the purpose of Economic Month and Master Builders KwaZulu Natal and Smart Economics are hosting a webinar to raise this awareness to bring about economic risk in the construction industry. Before I hand over you to the main speaker of the day, I just thought I'll share with you an initiative that we started about a year ago to align ourselves with this economic regulations that was published in 2019. The Master Builders KwaZulu Natal offers a comprehensive health and safety solution to its members in the built environment. And with the publication of these regulations, we felt it was necessary to add this service to our membership as an offering to them. So I'll take you through a few slides just to give you a bit of background what the service is all about, and then we will commence with the webinar and our main speaker. So the Master Builders KwaZulu Natal has added the economic service to its bouquet of health and safety services already offered. The management of economics in South Africa construction industry is regulated through Occupational Health and Safety Act of 1993, as we all know, as well as through construction regulations and recently published the economic regulations of 2019. Despite these legislative impediments, the implementation of economics in South Africa construction industry is limited. Consequently, unmanaged economic risks are prevalent in South Africa, and they are globally and remain a significant threat to the productivity, quality, safety of operations and personnel. As the voice of the KZN construction industry, the association provides a comprehensive suite of services to its members, including training, occupational health and safety service, medical surveillance, assessments, amongst others. Since the level of implementation of economics in the construction industry is limited, there's a lot of scope to assist the industry to better understand and manage economic risk, reduce injuries and accidents, and comply with legislative requirements of managing economic risk within the construction operations. In line with this, the association has added this service to its offerings. So the value proposition, construction economics, is about finding ways to improve work conditions in the construction industry in order to make operations more effective while also improving the health and safety of workers. We do that through the prevalence of economic risk in construction systems linked to poor work health effects such as musculoskeletal disorders and reduced efficiency. We also try to do that through preventing accidents and complex socio-technical systems such as in construction industry are linked to poor management of economic risk, and managing economic risk is a legal mandate through the Occupational Health and Safety Act and its pertaining regulations. We further also do it through training, economic consulting and research. So the training will consist of the introduction to economics for construction operations, the legal requirements for managing economics risk in the construction industry, conducting economic risk assessment, action investigations, and system evaluations. We also do economic consulting through risk assessment, reviewing of existing medical surveillance programs, and provide advice, accident investigations and incident investigation, and obviously assist with drafting the necessary policies and procedures and training material that goes along with it. Further to that, we also embark to do research on various economic topics to address existing and future challenges at workstations, organizational and industry-wide levels. For further details and assistance regarding that, feel free to contact myself. There's my details. My details will be made available once again at the end of this webinar, and we look forward to hearing from each and every one of you that are interested in making use of these services. Before I hand you over to Smart, I would like to introduce her to you. She's a certified ergonomic and human factor specialist and is the founder of the Smart Ergonomics, which is a consultancy that specializes in human factors, ergonomic services for various industries, including railway, manufacturing, mining, and service industries. The highest qualifications is a Master in Science degree in Ergonomics and Human Factors, obtained from the Rhodes University in 2009. She has over 16 years experience applying human factors in ergonomic consulting, training, and research services in variety of workplaces and industries within the following areas: human factors in ergonomic compliance, human factors in ergonomic risk assessment, accident and incident investigations, risk management, research and development on various topics, to name a few. She is also the Vice President of the Ergonomic Society of South Africa and associated member of the Chartered Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors in the UK. I thank you. I just like and thereby hand you over to Smart. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to your presentation.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Neil, for the introduction. And I think, as Neil has already indicated, it is indeed a pleasure and quite an honor to have everyone joining us today on this collaborative awareness session, really, on ergonomics, specifically for the construction industry. So we're going to be talking today about a topic that I think a lot of people have been asking about. And this is not just people who are members of Master Builders KZN, but also people who have been approaching me in my personal capacity, have been asking, ergonomic risk assessments. What is ergonomics? How does it, what does it mean when it comes to the construction sector? And also, how can we basically go about initiating efforts to try and manage risks within the ergonomic risk, rather, within the construction sector? So I'm really, really happy that Master Builders KZN has agreed for us to work together on basically bringing ergonomic solutions to the industry. And I would like to send out a particular warm welcome to any Master Builders KZN members who are here. And if there are others who would like to join Master Builders KZN, I think this is an opportunity that you can use to try and get to know a bit more about Master Builders KZN, so that you can maybe take advantage of some of the services that they are providing. And as Neil has already indicated, there's now a whole suite of ergonomic services that have been added through our collaboration with them. So if you don't know yet about Master Builders, please go ahead and find out from their website so that you can see how you can take advantage of some of these services that they're providing through our collaboration. So I see that we have quite a number of people that registered. We had over 800 registrations, I think, almost 900 in fact. I see quite a lot of people have joined us today. So thank you so much in advance for taking the time out to be with us today. We look forward to your really engaging questions. We hope that you can use the chat to basically engage with us and interact with each other. A lot of other people have already started asking questions. We will address them a little bit later. I know there was one already which was asking about training. And I think, as you have seen, Master Builders KZN does offer ergonomics training on a variety of topics. So we've got some preset training, as well as some training that we can tailor make to your requirements there. So please do contact us at the end so that we can try and help you with your training needs. All right, so we're gonna get started. Oh yes, hi everyone. Hi everyone. I see we've literally got people from across the country. I haven't seen anyone from Mpumalanga, Limpopo. So if you're there, say hi in the chat. But everyone else, you are most welcome. All right, so we're gonna get started. Let me just get to my slides. All right, as Neil has already indicated, we're going to be mainly focusing on understanding ergonomic risk factors in construction work. As we go ahead, we might not be able to take questions as the presentation is going ahead, but use the chat to include your questions there. And then at the end, we will definitely try and cover as many as time will permit. So what are we going to cover today? So firstly, we do not make the assumption that everyone in the room knows exactly what ergonomics is. So we're going to try and get everyone on the same page regarding what is this ergonomics, and then talk about what are ergonomic risk factors, and in particular, how would they manifest? So in other words, what would they look like in construction workplaces? We're then going to very briefly touch on the legal requirements for managing ergonomic risks in construction, because of course we are finding that a lot of the people that have been contacting Neil and myself have been coming to us because they're like, oh my goodness, we've got this new legal requirement, mainly referring to the ergonomics regulations within the construction sector. Of course, it applies there. And people are saying, what does this mean? What do we need to do? So we're going to very briefly talk about what the legal requirements for managing ergonomic risk in the construction sector in South Africa are. We're then going to at a very high level, because of course, it's just a very short webinar, and we cover this in a lot of detail in the training that we do provide, the ergonomics training for construction, for the construction sector. We provide very detailed training on what are ergonomic risks, how do you go about identifying them, what kind of tools even you would need to use for the different kinds of assessments that you would be doing. But for this webinar, we are literally just going to be talking about what process would you follow to try and identify some of these selected ergonomic risk factors in construction work. And then at the end, we're briefly going to talk about what are some of the effective approaches that have been proposed that people can use to manage ergonomic risks in a systematic manner within the construction sector. And then we should, I think because the webinar is going up until 1:30, by 1 o'clock, we should have finished with the presentation. So we're going to have about 20-30 minutes, hopefully, to just go through the questions and have a discussion about what we're going to be talking about today. All right, so first things first, what is ergonomics, and why have I even put the term human factors in here? So if you look at the definition that has been provided by the International Ergonomics Association, they indicate that human factors and ergonomics are the same thing. These terms are used synonymously. So it just depends which part of the world you're in, which industry you are in terms of which term you are likely to be using. So within the construction space in South Africa, we predominantly use the term ergonomics. But in other industries, for example, in rail, for example, in aviation even, they namely use the term human factors, but we're talking about the same thing. And so when we are mainly referring to ergonomics, and sometimes you might see the term human factors coming up, please don't think we are now changing the topic. It's exactly the same thing. So what we also know is that ergonomics is a scientific discipline. So there's a lot of theories, principles, data, methods that underpin the science and the practice of ergonomics and human factors. And so a lot of people might think it's just common sense. And yes, there might be a lot of things which might seem like they're common sense. But in effect, underneath all of that, everything that we are doing is founded by scientific principles that are informing exactly what we are doing within the discipline. And so it also says that, this definition says that ergonomics is concerned with understanding interactions between humans and other elements of a system. So if you forget anything that we're going to be talking about today, Do not forget this. Everything we are doing within ergonomics is to try and understand how are humans, how are workers, and in the construction space, so that would mean workers at all levels of your organization, from the people who are doing basic construction work at entry level, all the way to the people that are making executive decisions. It's how all of these people are interacting with various elements of a system. We'll talk about what those elements are. We'll talk about what systems are, so that you understand a little bit more what we're talking about. But essentially, as humans, as workers, are working within construction organizations, they are interacting. They are doing tasks, they're using tools, they're working in certain environments, they're working within the organization. And these interactions are what are enabling the work to be done within these different construction environments. And then it says that we are basically applying these theories, principles, data to design systems better. And what does this mean? It's a design-driven discipline. In other words, we understand that in order to optimize human well-being, in order to optimize system performance, we have to design that into being. It doesn't happen by chance. And so this is why you will see when we're talking about the construction regulations, and when they talk about some of the design principles that have to be applied, the design principles are centered around understanding humans, understanding systems, and understanding how best to create compatible interactions between these humans as they are working within the various systems construction organizations. So yes, it sounds like it's a very loaded definition, but essentially what we are trying to do within ergonomics is to try and help organizations to ensure that construction work systems and the elements within those are basically designed in a way that will help humans to interact better with them. So in other words, we are making construction work systems more compatible to the needs, the abilities, the limitations, the capabilities of the users or of the workers that are working within those environments. And so what we often hear is that ergonomics is about fitting the job or the task or the system to the workers or the humans that are working within that system. And the analogy that I often use here is the one of using the pegs. If, for example, you're going to have a system where the system is not designed to accommodate the users, you're not going to have a fit. And when you don't have this fit, what often happens is that we will take this proverbial hammer and force fit people into systems that are not designed with their capabilities and limitations in mind. And of course, humans are adaptable. So what you often find is that they will try and make adjustments to try and work within these systems. But this often comes at a cost. And this cost is normally seen in people making errors, in accidents, in reduced efficiency, in non-compliance, and in a whole lot of other negative system outcomes. And so what we try to do within the discipline of ergonomics, everything that we're trying to do is to create a better match between the people or the users of the system and the system elements. So we're trying to move away from what you are seeing here, where you're having people being force-fit into systems that are not designed for them, with these consequences being these chips when you force-fit people into there. And we're trying to move more towards saying, we understand that people are different. We understand that they've got various abilities and limitations. So let's design the systems better so that we can accommodate these requirements and optimize these very people's performance. And in the same breath, avoid or try to alleviate some of the negative health and safety outcomes. So in a nutshell, that's what we're doing within the discipline. So if we are asking the question, what are ergonomic risks? We all know that from the OSH Act all the way to the ergonomics regulations, it says you need to manage ergonomic risks. But what are ergonomic risks? So within the discipline of human factors and ergonomics, we normally, as we've said, it's a systems-based discipline. Everything that we are doing, this trying to create this compatibility between people and systems, is basically trying to understand the work system. And the work system, in a very simplified way, is basically the organization in terms of its structure, the people that are working within it, the systems that are put in place to enable performance. The organization also is going to be made of the people that are doing the work. And these people are performing various tasks. They are sometimes using certain technologies and tools and working in various environments. So as people are doing all of these things, doing tasks, using tools, working in these environments and working within this organization, they are doing what? They are interacting with these various elements of the system. And so what you see as these arrows are interactions. So right now, as you are looking at the screen in front of you, you are interacting with that particular tool or equipment. As you are listening, as you are typing in there, you are performing various tasks. You are in a specific environment. Perhaps it's at work, perhaps it's under a tree somewhere, perhaps if you are in a construction site as we speak. So that's talking to the environments. And then the organizations that you're working within have a certain structure and all of that. So this is what we mean by various elements of the system. So when we're trying to understand what are ergonomic risks, we need to understand firstly that ergonomic risks occur within these systems, and these systems are really complex. So we refer to them as complex socio-technical systems. And so that's the first thing that you need to understand. The next thing you need to understand is as people are performing various tasks, they are actually performing various processes which have been put in place by these organizations that have constructed them. And these processes are followed to enable you to achieve certain outcomes. So whether the outcome is to build a certain building, whether the outcome is to design a certain bridge, whether the outcome is to lay down tar on a rural road, all of those are outcomes which are made possible through the performance or the enabling of processes that are put in place as people are then interacting with the task, the environment, the technology tools, and the environment and the organization. But at the core of these interactions, what is actually happening? Because all these interactions don't happen if the people are not there, right? So now, when you're trying to understand these interactions, they are at the very core of them an actual dynamic balancing act between the demands that are placed on people as they interact with the technology, the tools, the environment, the organizational factors. It's a balancing act between those working demands and the workers' capabilities and limitations. And every single second that they're interacting with these elements, you're finding that there's this balancing act happening. And that's normal. You never have any like a static kind of interaction. It's always dynamic because people are always changing. The environments that they're working in are always changing. The demands are also changing. So where we start having problems, and this is where ergonomic risks come in, is when the demands that are placed on people outweigh their capabilities. Now, that's when the interactions between the people, the tasks, the environment, the technology and tools, and the organization, that's when those interactions are suboptimal. And when you've got those suboptimal interactions and you don't have any kind of interventions from an ergonomics perspective, which are trying to alleviate and correct this imbalance or this mismatch between demands and capabilities, what you then have is when people are following these processes, they're not necessarily going to be able to achieve the outcomes in the way that they were intended to. And that's when these suboptimal interactions within your system are going to lead to suboptimal outcomes, such as people becoming inefficient at doing their work, such as the quality being compromised. So suddenly the bricklayer, for example, is not necessarily keeping straight lines as they're going across. They're not necessarily following the process that they were supposed to be doing. You find that sometimes people will experience high workload. They will have fatigue. They will have stress. You start seeing people becoming more and more absent. Others are at work, but presenteeism becomes an issue. Eventually, you might find that there's high turnover. And in some instances, when you've got the suboptimal interactions occurring, you then also have things like injuries, IODs happening. You get near misses, you get accidents and incidents. And so what we say is that anytime you find that your outcomes are suboptimal, that is a sure telltale sign that there's a suboptimal interaction somewhere within your system. So normally when people see these issues, they run and they say the person was at fault. But remember, the person doesn't exist in isolation. They exist in a system, and they are interacting with the various elements of the system. And so when their performance is compromised, it's because the interaction between them and the technology and the tools was suboptimal, or maybe the task or the environment or any combination of those elements. And so what we understand as human performance and outcomes of a system is actually possible because of the interaction. So if the technologies and the tools, the task, the environment, the organization is not designed optimally, then of course the interactions are also going to be suboptimal. So once again, what are ergonomic risks? Ergonomic risks are a result of suboptimal interactions between people and the other elements of the system. So please keep that in mind, because that is important. And so what we say is that if there's a mismatch between workers and the system elements, that's where ergonomic risks are going to be found. And when you've got those ergonomic risks, and I know I'm really simplifying this, but usually when these ergonomic risks go and unmanaged, you're then going to see these reduction in performance. You're going to see compromised health and safety of the system, all coming back to the suboptimal interactions. All right, so how do these normally manifest in reality? So as these interactions are happening, what we see, what manifests in a lot of cases are some of the risk factors that we're going to be talking about now. And now these will look different depending on the interactions, depending on how the people's capabilities and limitations are, depending on how they will manifest in terms of the responses of the people that are interacting. So in the first instance, and this one is the one that most people normally fall back on when we're talking about ergonomic risks, is the physical factors and the physical ergonomic risks that might manifest through suboptimal interactions between people and other elements of the system. So some of these things, what would they look like? What are these hazards and risks from a physical ergonomics perspective that you can start to try and see within the construction spaces, so that you can see if you're going to have problems? But also, this can start to help you see what are some of the risks that you are probably already including in your risk assessments, or possibly not including in your risk assessments. As we go through this list, please remember, this is not an all-exhaustive list. We're just giving you examples of some of the various ergonomic risk factors that might manifest in construction workplaces. So firstly, if you start seeing people, let's say maybe they are interacting with a specific tool, and as they are using maybe a drill or maybe even a jackhammer, you start seeing forceful exertions where there's a like high force that's kicking back in terms of how the person is interacting with the tool. Then you know that is possibly a misdesign or a poor design in the way that maybe the person is doing the task, or even in the actual tool itself. Perhaps the vibration is too high. Perhaps you haven't designed it in a way that it's taking into account the limitations in terms of force production from a human's perspective. So whenever you see forceful exertions, you know that especially if the exposure is prolonged, you're probably going to find that there's going to be some musculoskeletal strain that is going to be happening. If you see people adopting awkward postures, so what are awkward postures? Essentially, it's non-neutral positions that are adopted by the individual, or non-neutral positions that are adopted by the various segments of the body. So that will include things like people working in stoop positions. It will include people working with their arms above their shoulders. It will include things like people working with their torsos twisted on either side, working on your knees. So many of these, or combination of these, are awkward postures. So what the issue is with awkward postures is that because they are non-neutral, it means that they are going to be exerting higher forces than is necessary, or higher forces than that will lead to increased pressure in terms of the musculoskeletal system. And because these forces are high, if they are adopted for prolonged periods, if they are paired up with other risk factors like forceful exertions, like repetitive motions, they are also going to cause musculoskeletal issues in the long run. So if you see awkward postures, then you must know that there's a suboptimal interaction. Perhaps the surfaces that people are working on are not at an optimal height. Maybe they're too low or they're too high. Perhaps the positioning of the various tools and the process flow is suboptimal. That's why it might be leading to some of these awkward postures. You will then also have things like repetitive motion. That's another way that ergonomic risks might manifest. We know that if people are doing tasks repetitively over time, you're going to be straining those muscles and tendons or musculoskeletal structures that are involved in doing the task. And so the higher the repetition, the greater the risk or the greater the strain that is going to be experienced by the individual. So once again, that is also telling you that repetitive motion is going to be one of the other indicators that somewhere there's a suboptimal interaction between the people and the task that they're doing in a repetitive manner. Manual materials handling is also another issue. So manual materials handling on its own is not necessarily an issue. Where it becomes an issue is where you have things like, so by the way, before we get into when it becomes an issue, manual materials handling, for those who might not be clear, it's things like lifting, lowering, pushing, pulling. So anytime when you have to manipulate a load, carry a load, and anything like that, it becomes manual materials handling. And so this manual materials handling, if you're going to be handling loads that are too heavy, where there's repetitive motion, if you're going to be adopting awkward postures as you are doing this, if there are excessive reach distances as you are handling these loads, and a whole lot of other risk factors, then it becomes an issue. And once again, when you see excessive manual materials handling being conducted, it then tells you that perhaps when these tasks were being designed, the capabilities and limitations of the individual were not necessarily taken into account, and this is how some of these risk factors will start manifesting. So even excessive reach distances will become an issue, because even there you are going to be loading your musculoskeletal system more than it needs to. And if you're going to be doing this repetitively, if you're going to be doing these reaching excessively under awkward postures, so once you combine basically the various risk factors, you then increase the strain on the individual. And this is also another way that these ergonomic risks are going to be manifesting. So even having to apply high or sustained forces, that becomes another risk factor. That's how these suboptimal interactions could manifest. Static muscular loading, even contact stresses will also be one of the ways that you start seeing these issues. So I'm just trying to hide this thing here. And then even when you're looking at the environments that people are working in, if you've got excessive physical and environmental factors, so if it's excessively noisy, if the working environments are poorly lit for the task that is being done, if it's people working in very high or very low temperature conditions, if there's vibration exposure and exposure to hazardous substances and biological agents that are excessive and are going to be affecting the individual negatively, all of these things are telling you somewhere within this system, there's suboptimal interactions that will be occurring. And as these are occurring, then these ergonomic risks are going to manifest. So as I said, these are just some of the physical ergonomic risk factors, and this is not all of them. It depends on your working environment. So as a start, you can start to see, go back to your risk assessments and see, are you identifying most of these if they're occurring? And of course, there'll be other ones which we can always help you to identify within your working environment. But it doesn't end there. There's also cognitive or psychological risk factors that can manifest. So through these interactions, the way that you're going to be responding as a worker is not only going to be physical. Sometimes the responses are going to be cognitive or psychological. And so you also need to be aware of what some of these cognitive or psychological ergonomic risks might be. So one of the issues that, or the gaps that we see quite often, is that people will normally focus on the physical responses or the physical risks. But please be aware that that's only part of the picture. You've also got cognitive, and we've got another category that we're going to look at in a couple of minutes. So when we're looking at these interactions, sometimes they manifest from a cognitive or psychological perspective. And what would these look like? If the demands placed on the people, excuse me, if the demands placed on the people as they're interacting with the various elements, if that exceeds their capabilities from a cognitive or mental perspective, from a psychological perspective, then you're going to see these ergonomic risks also manifesting. So what would these look like? If, for example, you're going to be overloading people, getting them to do work where the workload is high or perceived to be high, then that's going to cause an imbalance or a mismatch between what people are supposed to do versus what their capabilities are. But interestingly, it's not only high workload conditions that we are going to be concerned about, it's also very low mental workload conditions, because that's when things like boredom and monotony creep in, and they also will look like some of the symptoms associated with high workload. But of course, the interventions will be completely different because the exposures are different there. If you are requiring people to do a lot of tasks where you're overloading their memory capabilities, even there, you're going to start having people forgetting certain steps, maybe in a process. You're going to start getting people forgetting certain information. And as they forget some of those important pieces of information or steps in a task, you then start getting them not performing to the extent that they're supposed to. If you're going to find that the demands placed on people are exacerbated by distractions within the working environment, that will also lead to this imbalance between work demands and capabilities. And from a mental perspective, we know that our mental processing resources are quite limited. So when you've got distraction from other tasks, it also will eat up on your information processing bandwidth in a way, and that's going to cause this imbalance. And so when you're doing your risk assessments, you need to look at those types of distractions and how they might be manifesting as ergonomic risks that you need to be able to manage. Another issue, when people are being asked to perform multiple cognitively demanding tasks at the same time, that's going to cause, if these are not very well designed and executed in a manner that there won't be any compromises or overlaps in some of the cognitive resources that are used, you're then going to find that people will need to divide their attention. They're going to need to divide the resources that they are using to execute these tasks. And if you've got safety critical tasks or you're working in really high reliability environments, if that divided attention means that one of the tasks or subtasks has insufficient resources, it means that the task is going to be compromised. And so that's where you're also going to start seeing some of these ergonomic risks coming up. What you will also see is that when people are tired, when people are stressed, they start slowing down in terms of their mental processing speed, and their ability to respond in a fast, accurate way will be deteriorated. And so even here, if you are starting to see that people are performing different to how they normally would, go back and check, are they possibly compromised in terms of their fatigue or stress, or is your task causing them to have these negative effects, which are then going to be affecting their performance. So other issues like extended time on task, who's designing how long people should be working, how often they should be getting breaks? Because if that is not matched with our innate abilities and limitations when it comes to how long can we concentrate, how long can we divide attention, if that is not matched, then you might find that performance is going to be compromised even there. If you see that certain tasks have a lot of efforts that's required in order to execute them, even there it could be telling you that perhaps the way that you designed your task is not taking into account our innate abilities from an information processing perspective. You might find that when people are encumbered by stress, by fatigue, by all sorts of other things which might be reducing their mental processing capabilities, that is also going to be affecting their ability to interact effectively with the various elements of the system. So even here, you will see that these are just some of the ways that these suboptimal interactions between people and elements of the system could manifest from a cognitive or a mental perspective. Not a long, exhaustive list, but this is just some examples go back once again to your risk assessments and check how you are faring there. And then there's others that look at, from a psychosocial perspective, from an organizational perspective, there might be other ways that these ergonomic risks are manifesting. So if, for example, your organization is not designed in an optimal way to consider the capabilities and limitations of users, then of course you are already designing in risks within your system. And those risks will then affect the people as they interact with the various elements. And so what are we talking about here? If, for example, the tools that you are procuring or designing or manufacturing are not considering the user's capabilities and limitations, then of course the interactions are never going to be optimal. And how are you going to see that? You're going to see that in people not being able to execute the task in an effective manner. They're going to start making errors, and they're not essentially going to be able to produce high quality work. This also comes down to workstation design. So all of these things, usually workers have no control over these aspects. It's usually the organization that is putting these things in place. So if these are not done properly, you're then going to start having issues and some of these ergonomic risks manifesting because the interactions are already designed in a way, rather the interactions are already going to be suboptimal. Even your shift cycles, who decides how long people are going to work? Who decides when and how long breaks are going to be? The way that you design that has a very direct impact on your workers' capabilities and the manner in which they're going to be able to work in an effective manner and in a reliable manner throughout the shift that they're working. And then you might also be setting targets as an organization. So if those targets are set in a suboptimal manner without considering what is the innate capabilities and limitations of people, people are going to be working under time pressure, which means that they're probably not going to be producing work in the manner that you're looking at. They're probably going to be starting to make shortcuts to try and meet these objectives that you have set. So even if you're looking at, the issue of policies and procedures not being designed in a manner that considers the users and how they would normally behave and how they can influence their behavior, then even those become other areas where these ergonomic risks may be creeping in. So even negative safety culture elements creeping into your organization. So people being, punished for reporting issues or risks, people being punished for making mistakes, being punished for getting involved in accidents and incidents. Those are all indicative of negative safety culture. And that once again becomes an ergonomic risk. And so there's so many others: ineffective medical surveillance programs, poor communication. All of that is put in place by the organization. And then when you see people not behaving in the manner that you want or that you intend, then that tells you that somewhere, somehow within these interactions, there's suboptimal or a mismatch between the demands and the capabilities of people. And that's when you're going to see these ergonomic risks. So what I want you to take away from this is that, firstly, ergonomic risks result from a mismatch between demands and capabilities. They occur across your entire system because people are interacting as they're doing their work. They're interacting with all these elements of the system. And they will also manifest in different ways. They might be physical, they might be cognitive, they might be psychological, they might be psychosocial, they might be manifesting from in organizational risk factors as well. So this is really important, because if you understand this, it means that the way that you approach your risk management is going to be founded on an understanding of how these ergonomic risks actually manifest within your environment. And hopefully it's going to stop people asking for, these templates of risk assessment. I can't tell you how many times people come and say, just give me a template that I can, or a checklist that I can go and just, tick, tick, tick. I'm like, no, it depends. What are your systems? How are your systems designed? What are the elements? How are the interactions working? Because if you understand that the risks come from the interactions, you will then be forced to go back to your working environment and identify those interactions and identify when those interactions are suboptimal, and then put that into your risk assessment. So a predefined list is not always going to help you. Rather, go back and understand where are these risks coming from, and what do they look like within your own context? So this is really important. All right, construction, human factors and ergonomics legal framework. This is very brief, and I think a lot of people, as I've said, they've been approaching Neil, they've been approaching me, asking, these ergonomic regulations, are they coming up with new requirements? And the answer is no, the requirements have been there from the time the OSH Act was in place, because the OSH Act says manage all occupational risks. And it says whatever you are doing within your working environment, ensure that it's safe. So that means that effectively, if your working environment has suboptimal interactions that lead to ergonomic risk, those are included already in the OSH Act. So that has already been in place for a while. And of course, we know that the construction industry falls under the OSH Act. But of course, you will see that some of the construction work is not necessarily happening, in your main industries. It might also be happening in mining. And so even your Mine Health and Safety Act will also, in fact, includes requirements for managing ergonomics. It says so very explicitly, in fact, in there. So just because the OSH Act doesn't explicitly say manage ergonomic risks as well, doesn't mean that they're not already implied all the way from back there. So by the time that 2014 came, when the construction regulations once again explicitly mentioned the requirement to manage ergonomic risks across the life cycle of a structure, across all construction workplaces, you were already required to manage ergonomic risk. But in any case, construction regulations came through 2014, and they are very specific. And I've just taken 2 extracts from there. And just because the other extracts, for example, that are talking about medical surveillance and training, just because they don't mention ergonomics specifically, it says that whatever risks people are exposed to, they must know about them. So that means that your training should also include training on ergonomic risks. So this is what some of these extracts from the construction regulations say. And then more recently in 2019, through the ergonomics regulations, there's a whole lot of very explicit requirements that are put in place for any employer. And of course, this includes, because we know in the construction sector, it's not only your, your corporate kind of construction organizations, it's also, like your self-employed construction workers as well. These regulations actually apply to them as well, because it applies to self-employed as well as any employer and any employees who are exposed to ergonomic risks. And I can tell you right now, most, in fact, if not all construction workplaces, all construction projects will have ergonomic risks within them. And therefore, that means the ergonomics regulations will apply in that context. So if we are trying to understand, firstly, are ergonomics risks supposed to be managed in a construction organization? The answer is a resounding yes, definitely, absolutely. And where does the requirement come from? These are some of the regulations and the act which tells you that you need to be managing these risks. And you will see it's not new. It's definitely not new. So if you are not yet managing ergonomic risks and you're not sure how to go about doing that, that's why we are here with Master Builders KZN to try and assist you to understand this, so that from a legal compliance perspective, you are able to meet those requirements. So when it comes to identifying, and now we've got about 10-15 minutes left before we end the presentation. I hope the questions are coming in. I'm not seeing them at the moment, so I'm looking forward to getting those coming in when we do the Q&A. If we look at the question of how do you then, so now we understand what ergonomic risks are. We understand that you need to manage them. We understand that they manifest in various ways. We understand that they also manifest across your system and also even across the life cycle. So that means that anything and everything that you are doing as construction organizations, if you are not already considering ergonomic requirements, it means that you probably have a blind spot that is potentially already negatively affecting your system, your performance, and your people. And so the question is, how do you go about identifying some of these ergonomic risk factors? So the first thing we need to ask is, who should be doing these ergonomic risks, risk assessments? Who should be managing these? So firstly, as organizations, the responsibility falls mainly on your shoulders to make sure that you're providing organizations and working environments that don't have unmanaged ergonomic risks. So I'm not saying that you always going to be able to eliminate every single ergonomic risk, but you need to be able to understand what they are, what their impact is, and manage them accordingly so that you minimize their impact or you eliminate them where it's possible. So the question is, who should be doing this? So firstly, yes, the organization needs to make sure that this work is being done. And yes, the people that are exposed to this have a responsibility too. But in terms of doing the risk assessment, in the construction regulations, in the ergonomics regulations, it says this should be done by a competent person. So it tells you even, for example, in the ergonomics regulations, who is competent. And it's competent in terms of the qualifications, it's competence in terms of experience, it's competent in terms of understanding the context where you are doing that work, as well as understanding the legal requirements and the regulations around the management of ergonomic risks. And so this is why we always encourage organizations to seek out a qualified ergonomist who can come and help you to do this. And so I think we can applaud Master Builders KZN because they have identified that there's a need to partner with someone who can be regarded as competent to offer these services to construction organizations. And so please be careful. There are a lot of people out there who say they are competent. To ensure that people are competent, check their qualifications, check that they are able to actually tick all the boxes when it comes to competent person. And so I'll give an example in terms of competence, in terms of the people that are going to be helping you from a master builder's perspective. It's people that have master's degrees in ergonomics. It's people that understand the construction industry. It's people that have done work within the construction space. It's people that understand how to do risk assessments in safety critical, high reliability organization. It's people with a lot of experience in providing these solutions to various industries, including the construction industry. So please get in touch with Master Builders so that they can help you and pair you up with the person who's going to help you with that. The next thing that we need to ask is, when should you be doing these? And it tells you in detail in all the different requirements, legal requirements, how often you should be identifying these ergonomic risks. And it's very clear from concept and design stages that you should be incorporating ergonomics into your projects. It also says before you can do any work. So what's nice about construction work is that a lot of it, you will have an organization, and of course, during conceptualization and design stages for the organization, you need to include ergonomics. But as you start doing various projects, as you are putting together your safety files, as you are putting together all of your safety management system requirements, it means that at that level, before people are asked to pick up any tool in a construction workplace, you need to have also done ergonomic risk assessments so that whatever risks they might be manifesting, you can then proactively manage those. And then it also says during. So you don't do a file, put it away safely to collect dust as work is being done, because these ergonomic risks are very dynamic. You need to have your eye on how these risks are being managed as people are doing their work and manage them accordingly in that way. It also talks about the fact that whenever there are changes to the design or construction, that will change the risk profile. So now this is interesting, and it's very, very open-ended rather. So what would change the risk profile? Anything that changes the demands and the capabilities of humans. So if you change the people, the risk profile could change. If you change the tools, if you change the environment, if you change the tasks, if you change anything within the organization, that will change the risk profile. So what this means is essentially whatever changes come into your system, you need to understand what do those mean in terms of the ergonomic risks and how those are manifesting from a physical, cognitive, psychological, organizational, psychosocial perspective. And then, of course, whenever incidents happen. And I think this is also interesting. It says you need to be minimizing ergonomic related hazards in all phases of the life cycle of a structure. So from the time you design a building to the time that you decommission it, wherever there are going to be people working with it, interacting with any elements within that system, you need to be able to identify ergonomic risks and manage them accordingly. And then it says, how do you go about doing this? Of course, this is a very, very wide question. The how will depend on what are the risks, and we'll talk about some of the considerations in a minute. But the idea is that ultimately you need to minimize these ergonomic related hazards by optimizing the interactions between the demands and the capabilities of people. And then you also need to do this by incorporating ergonomic design principles. And there's quite a few of those that we can help you understand, that you can see even as you may be monitoring, auditing your system. You can always go back and check, are we still incorporating these ergonomic design principles? So just in the last couple of minutes, we're going to talk about the actual steps that you would follow as you go about doing ergonomic risk assessments. In the first instance, a lot of people that we have seen, and we have even reviewed, so that's one of the other services that we do and that we offer, is that people come to us and they say, here is our risk assessment. Tell us, have we done this right? Have we considered all the risks adequately? And one of the things that we often see is this checklist kind of format. And we're not saying checklists are an issue, but most of the time the checklists are not necessarily helping you understand the risks within the settings that you are trying to do risk assessments in. So what you will see here are a variety of examples of different tasks that people are doing within the construction space. And what I want to point out is that the ergonomic risks, it might look like, for example, all of them are adopting some kind of awkward posture, but that awkward posture might be coming about from different interactions between people and various elements of a system. And you will see that the awkward postures are forced onto these people because of the way that their workstations, their tools are designed. So if you're just going to go in with the checklist and you just point out, yes, there's an awkward posture, without understanding where does the awkward posture come from, where is the suboptimal interaction coming from, it means that even your interventions are not necessarily going to be hitting the bullseye. So the first thing that you need to be able to do is go in and understand the context. What does that mean? It means go and observe people doing their work. It means go and do task analyses so you can understand the process. You can understand exactly who is involved. What are they doing? How long are they doing it? Oh, they're lifting something. How big is this thing? How heavy is it? What are the dimensions of it? Where are they handling it from and to? Who else is involved? What communication? So all of these things, go in and understand, because I can assure you it will not be exactly the same in all the different contexts. Go and review documents, talk to the people. This is important. Talk to the people that are doing the work, because they will also tell you where some of these ergonomic risks are manifesting. So when you're understanding the context, you can firstly basically go in and understand the work system, understand the processes, understand what are people trying to do, and then go back and understand where are these interactions suboptimal, and where are then the ergonomic risks manifesting from a physical, cognitive, organizational, and all of those perspectives that we spoke about. Understanding the context is so critical. And a lot of the times people just jump in and they start doing postural analyses without understanding what is happening, what are the tools, what are the tasks. And because construction tasks are so dynamic, you might, in the one instance, come in and you see this guy is mixing, cement. In 10 minutes' time, he's doing something completely different. So it's important to watch them, understand and talk to them so they can tell you the full spectrum of the tasks that they are doing, the tools that they are using, the environments that they're working in, and the organizational factors that they're interacting with. Because just coming in and doing a postural analysis just on this task means that you are probably missing out on a wide variety of other risks that this particular individual is exposed to. So it's critical, understand the context. And if you haven't done this process, your risk assessments glaringly show it. So please make sure that you understand this, or call us so we can help you understand your context better. Secondly, you then need to develop the most appropriate toolbox. And I say toolbox because you will not only have one kind of tool or risk assessment test that is going to test every single ergonomic risk that each work or each task is coming up with. So this is absolutely critical. And most of your risk assessments are just looking maybe at just one aspect. But we know that these ergonomic risks are manifesting in different ways, even for one seemingly small task. So it's important you have to create your toolbox based on an understanding of what is being done, based on understanding of where the interactions are suboptimal and how these ergonomic risks are manifesting. But also consider that what you might see as you're doing your observation is at a micro level, telling you what the ergonomic risk factors are. Perhaps some of these risks might not be visible at a micro level. Perhaps some of these risks will be at a macro level or an organizational level. And this is why it's important to consider the fact that the risks will manifest at all the different levels within your organization. So go back to your risk assessment. And if it's only looking at the workstation, you are missing a whole lot of other risks that are occurring at various levels within your organization. And what you will then see is that your toolbox will very likely be comprised of risk assessment tools that will help you understand at a micro level, at a workstation level, what's happening, as well as at a wider organizational level. What you then also need to be aware of is that as you are assessing your ergonomic risks, you don't, once again, only look at what's happening at a micro level, because you will find that the risks that you might see at a lower level in terms of maybe the the work process level are actually informed by other risks at higher levels. Maybe there's management decisions that are being made that is bringing in certain ergonomic risks, which will eventually manifest as maybe people making errors. And so if your risk assessment is only looking here, it will then make you fall into a trap of thinking that that risk is because people are negligent, for example, without realizing that this risk is manifesting here because there was a decision that was made at higher levels within the organization, and that risk is then manifesting at all the other levels lower down. So your risk assessments must not be myopic. They must understand that as risks manifest, they are dynamic, and sometimes they've got emergent properties, which means that they can be triggered by any risk through the interactions across your entire system. And so most risk assessments are very, very myopic. You only say there's an awkward posture, therefore people must just maybe, stand up straight. And it's like, no, there's a reason why that awkward posture manifested in that way. Go back and look and see what was happening with procurement. Are you procuring the right kind of equipment and workstations? Are you designing them properly? Is the supervision fine? Because all of that will tell you why this risk is manifesting. And particularly if you do this process properly, you then eventually will be able to see what are the best interventions to bring in to effectively manage those risks. And so with this camera, I've run out of time now. With this slide, what this is just showing you is when they have gone back and they've tried to identify, for example, for musculoskeletal disorder, what the issue is. A lot of people will tell you, no, it's because people were adopting awkward postures and maybe they were exposed to cold temperatures or whatever. But through investigations of the risks and the suboptimal interactions, we are realizing that what manifests at this level here is actually affected by risks that are engineered into your systems at higher levels of the organization. So your risk assessments need to consider this approach for you to be able to come up with the best solutions. So the question then is, does implementing ergonomics work? Yes, it does. And in South Africa, we might not yet realize this. Internationally, ergonomics has been implemented for decades, and they have realized the benefits of implementing ergonomics. In this graph, for example, they were able to look at and track the occurrences that happened over time, and they tried to look at and see where the contributory factors were coming from. And one of those in the middle here was human factors or ergonomics related contributors. And through managing these as well as others, they were able to see progressively that the number of accidents that they were having was reduced over time. And we know in the construction space that we have a lot of issues with accidents. It's notorious for accidents, for injuries. So that means that even within this sector, we can actually realize a reduction in these negative system outcomes if we are able to effectively manage some of these ergonomic risks. And how do people see some of these things? You'll see that case studies have shown that through implementing ergonomics programs, there's a variety of improvements that were realized within those systems. And yes, some of these might have been from other industries, and some of them were, of course, from the construction space. But you can see they were able to reduce work-related musculoskeletal disorders quite substantially, incidence rates, workers' compensation costs, productivity improved, absenteeism was reduced. So these things are actually happening. Other organizations who are implementing ergonomics programs are able to see this. I have seen this through assisting some organizations. And so, yes, it might cost some money to start implementing these issues, but a lot of the times organizations don't realize that not managing ergonomics is already costing you millions of rands in some instances. So if you don't understand what the current cost is, come to us. We will help you quantify that cost. And through managing ergonomic risks, you will then be able to see that actually you are actually saving your company because you're then alleviating the costs that are currently being borne by your organization. So lastly, effective approaches for managing ergonomic risks. And of course, we're not saying there's one foolproof way of managing ergonomic risks. Your context matters, your objectives matter. But what we have seen overall is that firstly, early introduction of ergonomics into work systems works best. So the earlier you introduce ergonomics, the more effective it is, but also the cheaper it is. So this doesn't mean that if you are already, implementing your systems that it's too late. It's never too late. The next best time is as soon as you're aware that you need to implement ergonomics. So as early as possible where you can, but when you haven't done that, the next best possible time is now. What we also have seen through evidence is that having isolated interventions where you get a worker complaining about back pain and you go and you fix that only. You get the next one complaining about accidents, then you go fix that piecemeal fashion. That is not the most effective way of implementing ergonomics and managing ergonomic risks. The most effective way is to implement ergonomics through an ergonomics program that is going to be implemented across your entire system. But also, you then don't just have it as a standalone program, you find a way of effectively integrating it into your existing safety management system. So most construction organizations already have safety management systems in place. So find a way of integrating the ergonomics program within that so that it can be more widespread within your organization. What we have also seen is a really effective way of managing ergonomic risks is to adopt a participatory approach. What this means is that you are saying, I understand that the users, remember we said in that system, the users are central. They understand how they are interacting with the various elements of the system. They are the ones who are experiencing these ergonomic risks. They are the subject matter experts in their work. So they are best placed to tell you what is working, what could work better. So get them to participate in the management of these risks from the time you're identifying the risks to the time that you are managing them, because that is the best way that you're going to get some of these things improved within your space. The last one is that you obviously will probably not start at the highest levels. You're probably going to start at an emerging ad hoc level, but work towards progressively improving your maturity of the organization in managing some of these risks. And yes, you might start at the more basic rates where you just want to comply, but strive towards creating a culture of where ergonomics being implemented in a sustainable, proactive manner, because that's where you're going to have the biggest gains in terms of implementing your program. And so what we know is that, to conclude, organizations within the construction space are definitely experiencing ergonomic risks. They make your systems and your performance vulnerable to some of these ergonomic risks if you are not managing them. And we have seen them in worker injuries. We have seen them in accidents and incidents and just general reduction in your productivity and quality goals. So what you need to do is basically do the hazard identification and risk assessment, educate and make your people aware. Medical surveillance comes in and then implements the controls that will ensure the effectiveness of the management of these risks. And in every single step of the way, we've got ergonomic services and solutions that we can actually help you with in that regard. So please do contact us so that we can assist you there. And then, of course, there's evidence that suggests that integrating human factors across the entire safety management system of your organization is going to assist in managing these risks in a comprehensive, proactive, and sustainable manner. So in other words, there's no reason for you actually to not be implementing ergonomics. All right, I apologize, I've gone over time a bit, and I think we've got maybe about 18 minutes to do questions and answers, but I will hand over the presentation so that we can start doing these Q&A with everyone. Am I handing back to you, Neil, or to Joel?
I will be a combination of the two of us, but I'll start off by saying thank you very much for this comprehensive discussion and share of knowledge you did. It was evident in the comments made by several of the attendees how passionate you are about this subject, and it's clearly seen in the way you present and the way you engage with us and that, and we thank you for that. So let's start off with one question here that I saw just glancing through. Can ergonomic risk be added to your baseline or issue-based risk assessment, or should it be a completely separate document?
Okay. So you need to consider how your organization is currently identifying risks. If you start off with the baseline risk assessment, your baseline risk assessment is supposed to identify all of the baseline risks within your organization. So of course, ergonomic risks should form part of that. And then you might also find that you've got issue-based risk assessments. You might have post-occurrence or post-incident risk assessments. So whatever risk assessment you are doing, so long as ergonomic risks are prevalent, those should be incorporated into your risk assessment. So some organizations will say we prefer to document this differently or separately. I always say they're not separate, so you can include them in your normal risk assessments. So that's what we would normally advocate, that you incorporate them into your existing risk assessment processes, so that they don't become almost like a standalone, because they are part of what you are doing as you're managing risks. So yeah, I think that answers the question.
Okay, and then another question that I kind of lean towards Sally here said, given the variety and task demands in the construction industry, what is the preferred method to quantify associated risks? I think further to add to that is the fact that we have various tasks and trades within the industry. We have quick turnaround, normally that's the case, and that individuals that are part of such work vary in length, size, comes with its own challenges. So give us a bit of an idea, how would you go about putting something together so that you meet the requirements of the ergonomic regulations?
Okay, so I think in a lot of instances, a lot of people are probably, or a lot of organizations might probably already be identifying some of these ergonomic risk assessments, but maybe the issue is whether or not this is done adequately and comprehensively. So if you're not sure, rather bring in an ergonomist who can then help you to do that. But I think if you look at the structure that are provided in terms of understanding work systems and where ergonomic risks will come about, or how they're going to come about, that can already help you to see if maybe you are missing a certain aspect of the ergonomic risks as they're manifesting within your system. So I think if you're not sure, rather ask someone who is going to help you, or as a start, look at your entire system. Look at that work systems model that we presented, for example. Consider the different ways in which your ergonomic risks might be manifesting, and see also if through implementing the controls that you're currently implementing, if you're actually able to alleviate the risks that are already manifesting. If you're not, that probably tells you that the tools that you are using are probably not effective, that maybe the process that you're following to identify those risks is probably not effective. But really, I would really encourage you, rather get someone who can help you, distill it better. And that normally would be an ergonomist. So if, for example, you approach master builders as an example, they'll be able to say, okay, this is the situation. Let's understand your context, understand where the gaps are. what do the requirements say from the legislation perspective, but also what are your requirements within your system to try and help you improve some of the safety issues that you might be experiencing. Then we can take it from there. So there's no one way or one approach, I think, that one would apply across the board.
Now, before I give over to Joel, in case I missed one or two questions, there's another one that came here. You mentioned a very interesting issue of people rotating workers for long shifts and only looking on productivity. So the question is, what tools or measures would you recommend for a survey on ergonomics, mainly physical and mental issues?
So the answer is it depends. It depends what the risks are. The type of tool that you're going to be using will depend. So it depends, for example, are you looking at postural issues? Are you looking at manual materials handling issues? What are the issues? What are the risks that you are trying to quantify? Once you understand what those risks are, you then look for the most appropriate tool. So what that means is, if, for example, you're looking at postural analyses, are you looking at whole body? Are you looking at, maybe upper body? Because then there's different tools that you could be using there. At what level do you want to look at that? Are you looking at maybe just a postural analysis, maybe using, like your basic ruler and Reba? Or do you want to go a little bit more in depth and do something more extensive, maybe like a level 2 or a level 3 assessment? So it all depends. And where you, or the best tools will be informed by what are your risks. And normally you'll find that with your high level, maybe checklist kind of tools, it helps you to identify, is the risk there? And then once you have identified that the risk is there and perhaps it's high, you can then realize that you probably need to do more investigation. And so you can then pick more suitable tools to get that detail coming in. So what I would also just maybe caution is that you need to make sure, of course, that the tools are fit for what you are doing, and that we always try to say, first go for the validated tools, because those validated tools will be the most, will be the ones that have been validated and checked, and you're probably not trying to use your own methods, whereas there's other ones that have been validated. So we always advocate that where possible, try to use those validated tools so that you can back up what you are finding in your risk assessments as well.
Joel, is there anything that I missed? Maybe you can ask one or two questions.
Thank you, Neil. Hi, Sma. Yes, so some of the questions that did come out was, who can conduct an ergonomic risk assessment?
Okay, a competent person, and a competent person can be, and by the way, I think most of the competent people within the ergonomic space are those who've got ergonomics qualifications and experience and who understand the context as well as the legislative requirements. But this doesn't mean that it's only someone who has done a master's in ergonomics like myself. You might find that there are other people from cognate disciplines who might have gotten the relevant qualifications and experience over time that it would enable them to check off all those boxes of competent person. So the ergonomic services that we're offering within this relationship that we've got with Master Builders currently is saying, we're going to give you someone who's a master's in ergonomics. We're going to give you someone who's got experience in doing ergonomics risk assessments and all sorts of other ergonomic services, and someone who understands the legislative requirements as well as the construction working environment. So that's what competent would mean in the context in terms of what we are offering. But of course, others might be able to say, well, I've got different kinds of qualifications. Perhaps then you must just make sure that you would still be able to tick those boxes if you ever were audited or inspected or whatever the case is. But satisfy yourself that that person fits those requirements.
Okay, thank you on that one. And the other one is an ergonomic risk assessment to be done for every employee on site or generalized to all employees doing the same task?
All right, so that depends. What are you trying to do? You might find that there's probably an incident that happened. And so the risk assessment that you are doing is, a post-incident risk assessment. So of course, when you're doing that ergonomic risk assessment, it's going to be focusing on the factors around or the contributors to whatever incident happens there. So you're not going to go and do an assessment on every single person, whereas you already know what you are trying to investigate. So it depends. This is going to be the answer to everything. It depends. If you're doing a baseline risk assessment, or if you're doing your initial ergonomic risk assessment, then it depends. What are you trying to do? If you're trying to comply, you must go back and look, for example, in the regulations. What do they say? They say that in the ergonomics regulations specifically, they say that anyone or any worker who's exposed, you must be able to identify what the effect of that exposure is. So because people are different, it means that we're going to interact differently with these different elements of the system. So what I always then say is, if you are trying to comply to the requirements of the regulations, strictly speaking, you should be doing an assessment on everyone, because the risk assessment results will differ. If, for example, I'll give you an example. Let's say you've got someone who's lifting a 5 kg block to do some building. If I'm lifting it, I'm going to be affected very differently to if Joel is lifting that, because he might be stronger than me. The risk assessments that we're doing, and maybe I'm also shorter and he's probably much taller than me, the way we are interacting with those risks will lead to the risk assessment results being very different. And so if you want to also connect this to your medical surveillance, then strictly speaking, you need to do a risk assessment looking at me. You then need to do a risk assessment looking at every single other person as they are doing the various tasks that they're doing in the strict sense. But of course, a lot of people say we don't have money, we don't have time to go around and do risk assessments on every single person. And if you look at maybe at a typical construction site, like a large project, there's a lot of people there. And so from a practicality perspective, you might need to find ways that you can try and say, well, we're going to do this in a phased approach, or we're going to try and have a different way of trying to manifest or trying to quantify some of these risks. And I've seen this happening because I've got a case that I'm working on right now, which involves, claiming back from a musculoskeletal disorder perspective. They will always go back and drill down and say, this particular individual, the risk that they were exposed to, what happened? Did you do a risk assessment? Did you consider what they were exposed to? And in a lot of cases, organizations haven't been able to do that because they were sampling like you would an occupational hygiene survey. But because the risks are very different for various workers, you might then have a gap when it comes to that. So to give you a short and quick answer, it depends what the type of risk assessment you're doing is. It depends what your intentions are. Are you just trying to meet the legal requirements? What are you trying to do? So yeah, it depends.
Thank you, Sma. I think that answer is literally what everyone was thinking and looking for. In terms of another question, what came up was, what measures can be put in place to reduce risks associated with jobs like social working?
I don't understand that question. What measures
can be put into place to reduce physiological risks associated with jobs like social work?
Okay, so I would first need to understand which particular risks are you referring to before I can then say what would be the most appropriate measures. So if we're looking at social work, like which aspects of social work? Is it the social work? Are you talking about social workers? Or are you talking about, I'm not quite sure of that question, but I think importantly, the approach is first understand what are the risks, and then you would be then able to then construct the most appropriate measures to try and alleviate whatever risks have been identified, whether it's social work, construction work, whatever kind of work. The approach would be the same. Understand the risks, understand what's the best way to then create that match between the demands and the capabilities of people.
Thank you very much. Over to Neil.
Yeah, I think looking at the time, we've got like 2 minutes left. I would like to encourage each and every one of you to complete our survey that goes along with this I don't know if there's any final words from your side before we close. I close this webinar. You good?
From my side,
Yeah,
well,
your side. Anything else you'd like to add? Sorry.
All right. No, just from my side, just to say once again, thank you to everyone who attended. We really, really appreciate your time. And I see that some people have said, are we going to be doing more of these? And I think with the relationship that we have established, there's definitely scope to do more awareness. But we also will be, putting together our training schedule so that we can then be able to publicize that, and you can come and attend, more in-depth training on some of these issues. And I think if you can then also, get in touch with us, and then I think I'll just put back Neil's details on the screen so that you can be able to see who do you contact if you are trying to basically start, attending to some of these ergonomic issues. You can contact Neil, and through him, we'll be able to then assist you with your ergonomics requirements. But yeah, thank you so much. We will be sending out the recording in due course. So those who are not able to attend because of load shedding, we can definitely catch up when it comes to that. But thank you so much to Master Builders as well for collaborating with Smart Ergonomics on this.
No, thank you for you and your passion towards the subject. As I said, it was evident throughout the chats how people comment on your way of presenting and how passionate you are about the subject. And as an association that looks after the employers in the built environment, we like to ensure best practices, compliance with various pieces of legislation, whatever they are, whether it's in health and safety or even in business. And these are just one of these initiatives that we like to do to ensure that our members and the employees comply with legislation, but more importantly, that everyone goes home healthy and safely every day to their loved ones. So from my side, once again, thank you for each and every one of you that made the time to join us today. We really appreciate and value it, and look out for future similar webinars on similar subjects. And take care, everyone, and stay safe. Goodbye.